now tuned in to the Cosmic Convos podcast, your number one source for accurate, relevant, and thought-provoking astrological conversations in the podcast nation. The place where stars and minds align.
Peace, you are now tuned into the Cosmic Convos podcast. I'm your humbled host, Harut, and we got the man of the hour, Master Astrologer, Brother Ra. How you doing?
Oh, peace, brother. Doing well. How about yourself, brother?
Pretty good. No complaints, man. You know, we finally got around to doing this, right?
Indeed, it's here. We're getting it started.
Absolutely. So, you know, this is the first episode, you know, of this podcast, and I think you all will be in for, you know, real good treat. To my knowledge, I don't know of any podcast that will deliver the type of content that, you know, we plan to give you throughout the duration of this show. So I think, you know, this is something that's definitely needed, you know, in the whole podcast space, and, you know, just in general, in the minds of the people.
Indeed, it's about time for the people to be in mass made aware of some things that have been suppressed, or maybe not even suppressed, but just ignored for quite some time. So we're definitely going to explore different areas with regards to astrology. We're going to explore so-called antiquated ideas that actually work in practice today. And we're also going to explore some current events and some recent topics surrounding events that we can look at through the eyes of astrology, so that we can get a good idea about how to use astrology in an everyday sense.
Indeed. So, you know, before we get rolling too much, why don't you, give the people, you know, a little background on yourself. Well, I'll start with, you know, myself. Basically, I'm Harut. I'm a filmmaker. I'm the owner of Push It Forward Media. And this podcast is brought to you by Push It Forward Media and Caliprosha Astrology. Those are our sponsors in both of our companies. But I'm a student of astrology. Study a couple different forms, including Chinese astrology, Qimendunjia, Bazi, Feng Shui, and the various Jyotish sciences. So could you give the people kind of a background of you and how you got into astrology, and, you know, what do you do with it?
Well, you know, Harut, I've been studying this for about 20 years now. So if I recall correctly, my first real class was right in 1999, 2000, when I really began to dive in and try to learn as much as I possibly could. I sat at the feet of some very awesome, deep brothers. One of my, always give him props, you know, Shib to whom, rest in power, rest in peace. That is one of the most phenomenal brothers I've ever met with regards to the science of astrology. I was a priest for a while. I did that. And of course, in that vein, you learn as many spiritual sciences as possible with regards to your interest, or, you know, what piques your curiosity. So, you know, I've been in it for a while. I went to school for it at the ACVA, American College of Vedic Astrology. Went there for a while, took a few courses, reached the level of certification and so forth. And from there, met a few other astrologers that just kind of put me right on the path of where I need to be. But from the beginning, it's always been sidereal astrology, and that's been my passion. Right now, going full speed ahead, you know, it's full-time astrology day and night. I have a astrology channel on YouTube called Kalapurusha Astrology. And you can also find me on Instagram under Shechem Ra, and also under Facebook as Shechem Ra. But the type of astrology that I practice and use is called, for lack of better words, Vedic astrology. The proper term is Jyotish, and that's spelled Jyotish. And in that science, it's a phenomenal science in that we really can literally see real time what's going on around us and in our lives. It is a science that's about, I think the oldest recorded information out of India would be right around 1400 before Common Era. It's called the Vedanga Jyotisha. And in that document or book, they outline a great deal about the study and practice of astrology. So just the old head, been doing this for a while, been around the block a few times practicing, and got a few pieces of information I'd like to impart to the people.
Good deal. Good deal. So, you all are in good hands. Indeed. So,
thank you, brother.
So, with that in mind, here, in the West, United States, and, throughout most of the world, astrology is, kind of, like a conversation piece. Somebody find out what day you're born, and then they say, hey, you're a Cancer, you're this, you're that, and, in your background, you just mentioned, Jyotish and, the Vedic astrology and different things. And, a lot of people, this may be the first time that they've even heard those words before. So with that in mind, could you give a little background of what, Vedic astrology is, and how does it differ from the astrology that's practiced here in the West, tropical astrology?
Sure, brother. Sure. Good question. Good way to kind of dive in this whole astrology piece. And so the differences between the two are, they're not, I want to say vast, but they're definitely some stark differences between the two. And this science, we're talking as far as the Vedas are concerned, goes back, at least 2,000 years BC, if not more. The fundamental principles of Jyotish is centered around Vedic thought out of India. And so when we look at it, the sciences that surround Jyotish include yoga. It includes Tantra. It includes Ayurveda. Ayurveda is a science of healing that comes out of India, again, thousands and thousands of years old. So, it definitely has an old source to it, and they have a whole fundamental culture that centers around this knowledge. In fact, you'll find that in India, professional astrologers are consulted on a regular by many of the people that live there. So this is, even in modern times, something that is considered very in vogue with regards to the information and how it's used amongst the people. So with that being said, you have mantras, you have yantras, you have all kinds of things that are associated with the practice of using this astrology, versus in the West, it's a little different. In the West, one of the things that we notice is there's really no spiritual practice behind the sciences. It is, of course, they use it where they attempt to, psychoanalyze you and give you information about maybe, things that are going on in your life and things like that. But, one of the things that I noticed over the years is that this science out of India is more predictive in nature. And it's less apropos applied to psychoanalysis, but more fundamentally focused on predictive powers. And you would be surprised how accurate it can be. I mean, there are parts of this science that we can use to even predict the time of death. So it's that accurate. It's not something that is a fly-by-night process. You can't just pick up a book and read it. It's something you really should have a valid and competent instructor guiding you through the process of learning how it works. It's very intricate and very complex. One of the other differences is that the measurements that are used are different. And so most, not all, most Vedic astrologers use a sidereal-based measuring stick, if you will, versus the Western astrologers use what's called tropical. And we'll get into some of that as far as those fundamental differences of those. But, if I'd have to boil it down to three primary differences, is one, there's very spiritually oriented, which gives you spiritual practices to implement. Two, it does definitely have a predictive application to it, so you really can predict to the hour, to the minute with this science. Very different from Western astrology, even though they do try to predict as well. And then third, of course, the way in which the information is gathered. Again, the measurements that are used, it's based on the night sky. It's based on what is called sidereal astrology. So if you had to boil it down to the basic three differences, those would be, I'd say, the highlights.
Interesting. Very, very, very interesting. So, just full disclosure, I'm a black man. You're a black man. And, you're speaking about this science that's been, kind of cultivated and preserved in India. So how does that, how is that relevant to, a black person or people of some other indigenous cultures?
Typically, in ancient times, the founders of astrology, and let me say this, that India is one of those founders, not the founder. There are civilizations that go back much older than civilizations in India. And let me say this, so they're all relative, right? India and ancient Egypt were considered sister cultures, if you will, very similar in regards to their purview of the world around them. But, there's a school of thought that really says that the founders, the originators, were between two areas, between ancient Egypt and the Babylonians. And, they go far back into antiquity with regards to the use of this knowledge. But, the Sumerians originally called themselves the Blackheads, which gives you an indication of, obviously their ethnic background or their color. And we all know that the ancient Egyptians, maybe we all don't know, but many of us know that the ancient Egyptians themselves were, of course, African descent. So, the ancient cultures, and of course, India, we know they're darker skinned people as well. So, out of all the ancient cultures, all the dark skinned people were the founders of this knowledge. So, with that being said, the Greeks were a little later, and they picked up not where we left off. They picked up where they found the information and could bring it into their own civilization and culture. So, bar none, the ancient cultures of the world, again, the primary three are ancient Egypt, Sumeria, later known as Babylon, and then, of course, India, were the three fundamental cultures that founded this. And it's very possible that these cultures independently found this information. And then, of course, over time, there were things shared or corroborated or, ideas that were transplanted around. But no doubt that the Greeks, when they got it, it was already old at that time,
Yeah. Okay. So you know, when the Greeks came into the picture, and I'm kind of, putting it together. So are you saying that the Greeks are kind of the originators of what we see today as Western astrology?
Well, if I had to boil it down, yes. And the reason why I say this, and there are certain texts that are out of India. One of which is called the Surya Siddhanta, and the Surya Siddhanta is acclaimed to have been written by the Yavanas. Yavana is a Indian or Indian term for foreigner, right? But when we go back in history, we notice that there was a shifting of powers, if you will, over time. Egypt ruled for thousands of years, and we're talking at least 2,000 years minimum, if not more. The Babylonians ruled, and they of course had subcultures that come out of Samaria, and the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Akkadians. All of them kind of run out of that line. But when the Persians conquered Egypt in 525 BC, they ran for about 200 years. And then once they were conquered by the Greeks, then of course at that point, then again, there was another shift of power to the Greeks. And one individual in particular by the name of Alexander of Macedonia, misnomered Alexander the Great, he traveled and conquered many lands, one of which was India. Of course, Egypt as well. And they also got a hold of Persia, which would be considered ancient Babylon. So, when they got a hold of the information, it was new. And of course, they had come up with, studies and ideas and took their culture, wherever they went. But for the most part, they adapted the information that they acquired and then, of course, blended it with their own. So, that's kind of how the Greeks interceded into the scene of things, where they began to conquer and acquire information from, the priests and the higher, the knowers and the sages of those lands, and of course acquiring their information, not in a way that we would consider as being polite, but they acquired it, and by doing so, amassed a great deal of knowledge, especially in Egypt. And there's a city that was, and still there to this day, named Alexandria. Well, in ancient times, Alexandria was considered to be the world's largest library.
Yeah.
And so, all of the information, all of the knowledge that was accrued over thousands of years fell into their hands. And so from that, we have the practice of tropical astrology, which is, to say the least, a mistake. So to answer your question, definitely the Greeks were the progenitors of what we would call tropical astrology. And they do have some older texts, again, the Surya Siddhanta, that mentions them and mentions some of the information that they brought and also acquired via India.
Dig that. So what would be the difference if somebody had, a tropical astrology chart, or they had a chart, erected, or not erected, but, had a chart from, one of the schools of Georgia?
Mm-hmm. The fundamental difference is, boiling it down to a point would be the sidereal versus tropical application of things. And so when we talk about sidereal, what we're doing is we're actually saying that when you look out into the sky at night, you are going to see the planets and the stars as they move from east to west. And when we look up, we actually can visually observe and measure the planets as they move in the night sky.
Yeah.
Now, I know this is strange and may be a shock for most people, but tropical astrology does not do that. What they do is, and it's really more seasonal astrology, if you will. And I know that's probably a little strange to say if there is such a thing, right? But
Yeah.
it's more seasonal, and it's based on the equinoctial points in the heavens. Equinoctial points, we're talking about March 21st, which is the spring equinox. We're talking about June 21st coming up. We'll have a summer solstice. We also have the fall equinox, which happens between September 21st and September 24th. And then we also have the winter solstice, which occurs and happens between December 21st to December 24th. Those are the equinoctial points.
Yeah.
And so what they have done is said, well, we're going to fix the signs based on the dates in which we use to navigate the seasons as the backdrop for their astrological computations. So it looks like March 21st, when we have the spring equinox, that is the official date, the stamped and approved date for all time for the beginning of 0 degrees Aries. Well, that doesn't match the night sky. When we look out March 21st in any point in any year, right? When you look on the horizon at sunrise, the constellation that will be rising is Pisces. The degree at which Pisces will be rising exactly at sunrise, March 21st, is 6 degrees Pisces. So, March 21st, the sky tells us that it's 6 degrees Pisces, but tropical astrology will tell us that it's 0 degrees Aries. Well, if you do just quick math, Harut, and you take 0 degrees, right, and move backwards to 6 degrees Pisces, you have a 24-degree difference.
That's a big difference.
Big difference. You know, this is a science, and so we respect it as such by acknowledging that measurements are key and crucial to getting the right answer. And so if we just use any basic mathematical formula, we would see quickly that 24 degrees, is a substantial difference. If we were going out and the weatherman said, hey, it's going to be 90, let's say even better than that, it's going to be 60 degrees today. Go outside and we feel it's a brisk 42 degrees. 44 degrees. That's a big difference in feeling and temperature.
Absolutely.
And excuse me, my math is off. Actually, no, it'd be different than that. It'd be 36 degrees, right? 24 plus 36 is 60. So let me get my math right, because that is important. But it'll be 36 colder. Degrees, right? Even colder from 60 degrees. So we're talking, you can feel the difference in the atmosphere, and vice versa. If we said it was 70 degrees and we walk outside and it's 94 degrees, it's a hot summer's day.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So degrees matter, right? And so those shifting points that happen every 72 years, 1 degree every 72 years, we will notice that the zodiac will be different. So in 72 years from now, when we look out March 21st, it will be 5 degrees Pisces, right? In the next 72 years, it'll be 4 degrees Pisces, right? Next 72 years, it'll be 3. Next 72 years, it'll be 2, then 1. Then we will actually be technically in the age of Aquarius. And that's about 432 years from now, give or take. And it's a general number, but about 430 years from now, we'll be technically in the age of Aquarius. So we're not there yet. We're still at the very cusp of it, but it's phenomenal because the cusp will bring substantial changes.
Indeed. So, with that being said, and what we were talking about a little earlier, kind of like a historical, context of the differences between the two systems. So you would say that in ancient times, some of the places where our ancestors come from, Sidereal astrology was the astrology that was practiced during those times, correct?
Yeah, absolutely, 100% correct. That is what was practiced. Yes, sir.
Okay. So,
Yes.
How did we? I mean, with that knowledge and this process of basically us moving backwards through the zodiac, and then you brought up the ages, the age of Pisces, and us going into the age of Aquarius. What significance did that have for us in ancient times, charting that, in our cover art, for the podcast, we have the Zodiac Adendra on there from Egypt. And there's a lot of different things in there. So could you get into kind of like what was the purpose of that in ancient times?
Definitely, brother. One of the things that a civilization will do is try to old civilizations, that is, would do is try to make sense of things, if you will, as far as what's going on around us. Why are we experiencing these certain sets of events? And of course, astrology was used to extract that information. And you'll find that in ancient Egypt, and it's wonderful that you brought about the Temple of Dendera, the actual that's the ceiling of the Temple of Dendera, and that is actually quite young in comparison to the older, of course, the pyramids and things like that. That temple was built by in the time that the Greeks occupied Egypt. So there, in that temple, that knowledge is older than that, of course, but that is the time and date that temple was created. But you'll find that the actual civilization of Egypt itself incorporated the knowledge of astrology inside of every major aspect of civilization. And you can go back and you'll find, for example, they have Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt, right? Well, Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt at one point in time in history was ruled by two different kings, right? You had one that had the lower Egypt, which was the red crown, the Jezreel crown, and then you had the Upper Egypt, which is the hedge crown, white crown.
Yeah.
And so there were two, right? Lower and upper. Well, during that time period, when we looked out due east on the horizon on March 21st, the sign that was rising was Gemini. And so for 2,160 years, 2,155 to be exact, but we round it up to give it a nice round number. 2,160 years, that sign rose on March 21st every single year. So you'll notice that Gemini is a sign of duality.
Yeah.
You'll notice that Gemini is a a dual sign. It's a double-bodied sign, is what they call it as well.
Yeah.
And things come in twos in that regard. So you had an upper and your lower. You had a red crown and a white crown. And even in fact, within these cities, they had two capitals, right? So each respective area, lower had two capitals and upper had two capitals. So again, the doubling process, right? We also know it as Haru and Set, Shu and Tefnut, right? These are the themes that were coming out about at that time. You'll even look at a lot of the old pottery and things of that nature and notice that these things were in play as far as what was being promoted in civilization at the grassroots level even.
Yeah.
So, it's from top to bottom that the ancient ones used astrology to guide civilization for thousands of years. Well, the thing about the signs and how they move through precession is they don't go forward, they go backward, right? So we move forward in time, right? But divine time moves backward. So when we look at Gemini, the sign preceding Gemini is Taurus, right? So when we go forward in time, we're moving back through the zodiac. So right around 4000 BC, of course, I don't have a specific date for you, unfortunately, but right around 4000 BC, right? The changing of power has happened again. And now we have the age of Taurus, right? So you'll notice that we call it so-called unification of ancient Egypt, where the two lands become one.
Yeah.
Right. Well, now we have the epithet of the bull. Many kings used the title of bull in their name, Mantu, right? Mm. The age of Taurus is also the age where we dealt with physical reality in a very, very phenomenal way. That's the age of the pyramid builders, right? And to give a little quick breakdown of how we know this is that the age of Taurus, right? We would look at, how do we inculcate that within the context of, they were pyramid builders. Well, the fourth sign from Taurus is Leo.
Yeah.
Right. And the fourth house represents your land, right? So they were masters, literally. Leo is the master, right? And the fourth house is the land. So they were masters of the land. In fact, they even engineered the Nile. Right? They caused the Nile to flow in the direction they chose. Right? So they were master builders, master construction. That's where, the real Masonic element started, is there. Right? So for 2,160 years, right, that age, right, and the people that were under the governance of Egypt recognized that age inside of their culture from top to bottom. Moving forward out of that age, when we shift again, right around 2200, running around between 2200 to 2000 BC, now we have a new age coming in, and this is the age of Aries. And so the age of Aries, you see again, right? The shifting from the bull epithet, right? The bull being, everywhere in culture and civilization and the king's names and so forth. Now we're moving into the age of the ram. And you'll notice all around Egypt at that time, you see plethoras of rows of rams. Right?
Yeah.
Right. And this is to show that they were showing you they knew exactly what time it is.
Wow.
Right? That their culture reflected what we say, as above,
so below.
So below. So, and no other culture has done this, Ateh. No other culture has done this. None. You can go to Babylon. You do not find, and you'll find some pictures, right? Like the Mithraic culture, which is much later. It's just a appendage of Zoroastrianism, right?
Yeah.
And Zoroastrianism uses astrology in some of their paintings and some of their sculptures, but not in the actual building of their actual the construction of their civilization. No other culture, not even India, has done this.
Wow.
So, when you know that they have come to the science of using astrology inside of civilization, building civilization, these people were master astrologers, right?
No doubt.
And so moving into the age of Aries, this is where we begin to have our separation, if you will, from the sidereal process to the tropical process. And, just to throw a few names out there, one of the real, I say culprits, right? It's criminal in my eyes, right? Because when you misapply information and give people confusing data, it can cause a world of havoc. But a man by the name of Hipparchus, he's a Greek, was a Greek, I want to say philosopher, but someone that studied in Egypt, right? And he studied a few other places. He went to Babylon as well. Got some information from them too. But no doubt he studied in Egypt. Many of the great philosophers in Greece studied in Egypt. We can name quite a few. We can go down the road. We can talk about Socrates, Egypt, Plato, Egypt, Pythagoras, Egypt, right? In fact, you've heard of the Hippocratic Oath, right?
Yep.
Hippocrates, right, studied Asclepius, and Asclepius was connected to Imhotep. So all of pretty much their sciences come right out of Egypt. So one of the things that Hipparchus did was, he so-called, right, was one of the ones that found precession, and that, the so-called scientific community says that the ancient Egyptians and the Babylonians didn't know about precession. Well, I just showed you that we did, right? If your culture is mimicking the heavens, right, through ages of time, obviously they knew, right, precession. We can prove that, from the jump.
Absolutely.
So, Hipparchus passing it down, Posidonius, Poseidon, as some people say, and then of course Ptolemy. Those are the ones that kind of ran with it, if you will. And when they got a hold of it, and it's funny that they come in and they misapply the information. The priests obviously didn't tell them something. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north. That's a feat that the Greeks couldn't even imagine. You don't find any pyramids in Greece.
Nope.
In fact, even their structure of civilization, you've heard of the Corinthian, the different 5 different types of pillars, right? All that's in Egypt.
Yeah.
So everything they get is from another culture. Well, when you get something from another culture and the priests kind of just nudge each other, we priests, hey man, don't give him that piece. He got it, but don't give him the piece that makes it work, right? Yeah. And the other thing is that you couldn't, because at the time that they found it, it was the age of Aries. So you wouldn't be able to differentiate Aries from Pisces, from Taurus, from Gemini. You couldn't do it. Yeah. So there's literally, they couldn't separate the two because there was nothing to separate from. Well, 2,000 years later, of course, when we look out, we see there's a difference. And 2,000 years prior to Hipparchus, there was a difference. So, when you get that and you start to see that, you kind of laugh and sniggle because it's like they knew something they didn't tell you, right?
Yeah.
And that's basically how we get the information we have today. Ptolemy was the most recent of those, and he wrote a book called Tetrabiblos. In that book, he acknowledges the ancient Egyptians themselves as having the most profound knowledge of all the ancient world. So by and far, right, when he created that book, again, there was no difference between tropical and sidereal, so we couldn't say that one was the other. But he did fix Aries at 0 degrees for all time. And that is why we have a mess of things when we look at, well, people say astrology doesn't work. Well, you're right. If you're using a system that's off between 23 to 24 degrees.
Yeah.
Correct. The funny thing is that when we move forward, let's say in about 7,000 years, the astrology won't match at all. Right. So this is how we know, right, that tropical, and not to say tropical's all bad, they did come up with a lot of inventive techniques such as aspects, which is really one of their biggest ones, squares, quincunxes, and trines and all that good stuff. That's Greek. It's not ancient. When it is ancient comparing to the other ones. But that in and of itself, they did make contributions. I'm not here to just disavow tropical. They do have some fundamental techniques that are awesome if you know how to incorporate them with the sciences. But for the most part, that mistake is grave and costs a lot of people a lot of. They could avoid a lot of things if they had the right information to go with what they're practicing. So, Sidereal is again based on the stars. So the beautiful thing about it, let's say I don't have a computer system, Atef. Let's say we don't have a computer system. Our computer's down. Let's say the World Wide Web is smashed, right? And computer systems are wiped out. We got hit by a
Y2K.
Yeah, right. What we can do, right, is to actually go outside, look up without any assistance, and say, "Hey, man, look at that big old bright thing right there. That's Venus, right?" Well, wait a minute. Venus is in a constellation that looks like a scorpion. Oh, it is. Venus is in Scorpio. Hey, we can see Venus is in Scorpio, right?
Yeah.
We don't have to guess. We don't have to run to a computer system. We don't have to run to an ephemeris, right? We can literally see it. Now, of course, we want to get specific and get degrees and get, the details. Yeah. Then you would use what we call an ephemeris, which is a table of time that has been used where we measure the movements of the planets over, hundreds and hundreds of years. But even without it, we can still predict somewhat to say, Venus is in Scorpio, so there might be some intensity of love about this time. Might be some jealousy coming up in our relationships. Might be a time where we, and we can use it for even more deeper things, planning certain foods, when not to plant certain foods, and so forth. So, the applications are endless. But again, we can actually gauge this from what we see with the naked eye, and we don't have to rely on any computers or any software. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Wow. So, you were going through the ages, and so right now we're in the age of Pisces. What did our ancestors have to say about the age of Pisces in our current time?
We can talk about the rise and fall, right? The fall and rise of the Black founders of civilization. It's a great topic, and it's actually even expounded on by one of the greatest minds on the planet, Round Neferamin. The first. It was an old document, I believe, back in the 80s that he wrote. And if you can get your hands on it, consider yourself lucky. But the document itself goes deep into how we got here as a people, as Black people. And our ancestors knew this was coming. We knew. One of the reasons we put things in stone is because stone lasts forever. In fact, there's the old saying that says that the pyramids fear only one thing, right? The time only fears one thing, and that's the pyramids themselves, right? There's even a statement that says the pyramids, they believe, may even be older than what they say, right? So, given that knowledge and given, again, the grandeur of ancient Egypt, and how they incorporated these things into their civilizations, one of the things that we knew is that when the age of Pisces comes, right, there was going to be a major shift in the powers that rule. During the age of Aries, there was a major shift of the powers that rule. That's when the Europeans begin to come out and to make themselves known. Well, hey, another name for a European is Aryan.
Yep.
Right? Right? Right in line with the Aryan age. Right?
Wow.
So when the age of Pisces sets in, right, and we're looking at right around 221 AD, right? When that age sets in, right, and this is long before Jesus, so-called Jesus Christ, arrives on the scene, the age of Pisces did not coincide with Jesus. It started 200 years before his so-called arrival. I'm sorry. No, I apologize for that. 200 years after his so-called arrival. When Jesus was on the scene, it was the age of Aries. So what you'll find is that the age of Pisces is the age that really, let's just even talk about the sign of Pisces. Pisces is a water sign. Water, right, as we know, right, is a means of travel, right? It's a means of travel.
Yeah.
And so that at that time, the world itself was a very small place, if you will. Everyone was pretty much, of course, there were people all over the planet. Let me just say that. But I'm talking about civilization as it began to take root. It's in a very small area.
Yeah.
Right? We're talking, I could say 3 points again: Egypt, Sumer, and India. Those are the three that kind of were the starting points of civilization, if you will. And the age of Pisces is all about expansion because it's ruled by the planet of Jupiter, which itself is the largest planetary body in the heavens.
Yeah.
As far as planets are concerned. And it's all about expansion, right? It's all about spreading. It's all about moving from a center point, outward. So you notice that, of course, during this age, the seas were navigated quite a bit. So one, of course, again, it's a water sign. So now we have expansion and we have water, right? So we have expansion over the water, right? Mm-hmm. And so, matching reality with what we see in the heavens, as above, so below. The Piscean sign is also a sign that equates or is considered similar to what we call the 12th house in astrology. And the 12th house in astrology has some very ominous messages behind it, if you will. Now, it's not ominous in the sense that, over time, anything that's negative has a positive and vice versa. Anything has positive and negative. But for the most part, it's not a sign or energy that's very palatable to the comfort zone of people. It is going to shift things in a way that literally change things completely around. One of the other things that we notice about the age of Pisces is the age of false religion. Right? You have two fish, right, swimming against the current of one against the other. So now we're talking about truth versus falsehood, right? Reality versus speculation, right? We can even say tropical versus sidereal, right? There's one fish going one way and another going another way, and they're both tugging at one another. Well, wow. They end up stalemating because two fish going opposite ways, right? You don't get very far.
Exactly.
But the age of Pisces, one of the stars, and in fact, there's a few stars that we could talk about in Pisces. One of the ones that I really want to hit on is what is called Difta. And Difta is, in fact, very close to what we know as, it's very close to that March 21st date as it rises right now. It's about 6 degrees Pisces. Little, maybe about 7 degrees, closer to 7. But Difta is a star that brings tragedy. It's a star that brings calamity, right? It's a star that brings disruption. So we know that, we can go back in time and talk about all the different things. But one of the things that we know about African people, they were put on boats and brought across vast oceans, right?
Yep.
And so that, again, holds true to the age of Pisces. The 12th house is a blind spot. When you look in the actual sky, it's right above the horizon, right above it. So it's like that driving. If you drive in the morning and you got that sun right in your face, right over the horizon, it's a blind spot. You can't see. Right?
Yeah.
Well, we've experienced this through slavery. And slavery did not start with the transatlantic slave trade. Let me also make sure I state that. Slavery started with the sub-Saharan slave trade, right, which was brought about through Islam. So, the people of color were predicted to go through, right, what we call the time of sleep, right? There's a book called 2000 Seasons, good book to read, right? Because 2000 seasons and 2000 years is right about the same time frame we're looking at for that age. And so during this season, right, or this time, the 12th house is also the house of sleep, right? So we would go to sleep, right? Well, if you rule, and I'm saying rule, I'm not talking about like play rule, like you like have a culture and it goes away and comes back. No, this culture existed. We're talking about at least minimal 3 ages, right?
Yeah.
Minimal. Well, when you rule that long, you can't rule forever, right? Some things that go up have to what? Come down. Right? And there's a cycle and a time for all things. And, it's just the time itself is that we're asleep. We're the oldest race in existence. And when you get old, you get kind of senile sometimes. Right. So
that's a good way to put it.
When you get old, you move a little slower. Right. But one of the things that we did also, and we recognize, is that you also must move in time with the seasons as far as astrology is concerned. And so you'll notice that as the Aquarian age begins to pick up, we'll begin to pick up. We'll begin to awaken. We'll slowly wake out of this slumber. And it's happening. We're having a conversation that is evident of that actual happening. So, it just shows that, time controls all things. It manifests, everything manifests in time. The supreme being even limits itself through time. No galaxy is created overnight. No solar system is created overnight. No mountain is created overnight. These things are long, long periods of time. So, if God creates through time, guess what? Man does too. And so we have to align ourselves with these particular cycles so that we can maximize, right, and really minimize the detriment that is caused us by us being asleep. So I say that to say, and it's not to say anyone else hasn't experienced this. Other races, of course, have experienced slavery and different things, but not on the scale, from what I can see, that Black people have experienced. Not the transatlantic slave trade where, hundreds of millions of people were murdered, and kidnapped and brought over to, foreign lands to, be put to work, so to speak. So,
for centuries, for the time frame as well. That's
absolutely. Yeah. This is something that we can literally see, and we know that if our ancestors were trying to tell us that, hey, we have an age of Gemini where we set up 2 lands, we set up 2 rulerships, we had the age of Taurus where we consolidated, we gained power, we built civilization, we have the age of Aries where we fought off the invaders, right? We, at that age, Egypt was constantly at war. At war. Well, guess what? Aries is the sign of war, right? So, we definitely can see, the ages and how they're manifesting on Earth. The other thing is that the age of Aquarius is not going to be so hunky-dory as most people think. You have the age of water, right, where we're in now, right? Well, the world has been mapped from top to bottom, left to right, up, down, east to west, right, north to south. We know the whole globe. But the thing is that now man is pervasive over the whole globe. Now he's literally causing, right, an imbalance due to his inconsiderate disposition around how he's created things, meaning that civilization is not as we did it, where it was one with nature, right?
Yeah.
It's not one with nature now. We have mountains of plastic in the oceans. In fact, they even have what's called the I think it's the garbage. I'm trying to get the name of it. It's the Pacific Garbage Patch, something like that, right? Where it's literally the size of Texas, right?
Yeah.
Off the west coast of the in the Pacific Ocean, and it's nothing but trash.
Yep.
So moving forward, as we begin to see these changes happen, these changes are not going to be one that are comfortable for man. We're going to have to work together. We're going to have to get over our differences. We're going to have to learn to do things in a way that is integrated with the earth, with the planet. And in order for that to happen, you have to come to a tipping point. And we really are beyond that tipping point. We're beyond it. I mean, at this point, to clean up, and I mean, they have come up with a way to get rid of space trash. That's how much trash this world has produced. It's even in space.
Yeah.
So at a point, excuse me, we're going to have to shift, right? And that shift we're going to have to do in about 400 years, give or take, right, is the age of Aquarius. So that shift looks like it's ruled by Saturn, right? Now, Saturn, right, is a planet of minimalism, right? It's a planet of bare none, right? You have to do this much with this little. You're noticing, right, as time has moving forward, families, just to show you right now, families are having to come together just to survive, to be able to make it. A lot of people are having to move back in with their folks, right? The principle of Aquarius is universalism. Well, we can scale it down and talk about really just coming together to be one, right?
Yeah.
And that's happening right now. We're going to be forced to have to deal with one another to overcome the mess that we've created. Right? And that's not fun, right? That's not fun.
No.
So, I don't want to harp on the age of Aquarius too much longer, but just to give you a quick, down and dirty, it's also co-ruled by a planet called Rahu, right? And Rahu, right, is also called the dragon's head, right? So we're going to have to deal with some dragon-like energies coming up soon, right? That it's not fun, right? It's very tumultuous and very disturbing, if you will.
Wow, that's interesting. So, I guess we can say, from, again, looking at it from a historical context, that, the different, situations that we experience today, whether you're talking about, the effects from slavery and, economic issues, specifically say the Black community and, just our whole path, up to this point, was predicted thousands of years ago. And that, where you may be able to point to, this person did that, or this group of people may have done that. Ultimately, it's kind of predestined, right?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Absolutely. It's predestined, set so that we would have an experience that we could learn from. And it can't be changed, but it can be co-opted. Definitely.
Absolutely. So, to that point, and this would be the last thing we go into. So what do we do with that? What do we do with that knowledge now? Understanding that, our situation is a part of our destiny. It's a part of what we have to do. How does that apply to us today in this time?
Well, our ancestors are very intuitive and could see things beyond what we probably would want to see. But the one thing that I know what we must do is begin to find ways to come together and to override our differences, to be able to work together to make things within the next 400 years palatable, so that when that baton pass happens, and that's what the ages are, it's just when we pass the baton, right?
Yeah.
They say there's no such thing as race. Well, I think our ancestors had a little different purview that we do, that there was races. In fact, Europeans were called Tamahu, right? We had a name for them. We had a picture of them, right? We had 4 major races. Well, 3 really. 2 of us, one of them, and one of what we call the Arab, right? So we understood that there were races, and that, this thing is about passing the baton. And so if we're wise, we will begin to pass this knowledge on to our children so that they can awaken their descendants and so forth, so that by the time that baton pass happens, we're in line and in step in sync, just like a relay race. We're ready to hand off and keep it pushing, right? So
Yeah.
Using the knowledge to do things on a very grassroots level, marrying properly, making sure your daughter and your son marry properly, making sure you marry properly, which then, of course, we're talking about this creates generations. And then, of course, if you're able to marry properly to create a family structure, right, then you're able to pass things on, right? And then by the time the gig is up, right, you look up and you say, hey, we're ready to keep it going. We're ready to take this and take it to the next level. One of the unfortunate things about the age of Pisces is also creates amnesia, right? And so we have a very serious case of amnesia, right, if you will, and not just Black people, everybody.
That's an
right?
understatement.
So, definitely. So, they use this knowledge to wake up. We use this knowledge to navigate. We use this knowledge to move in time. And when you find that it only takes 72 years to change 1 degree of consciousness on the planet, that's not very long. So let's use this, pass it on, use it wisely to create infrastructure, businesses, to bridge families. That's what marriage is really about, is bridging and combining families and making sure that you get the best of both worlds. We can use this like the ancients did to really make civilization what it should be.
Absolutely. So, yeah, man, that was a excellent breakdown. Excellent breakdown. Excellent walk through history. And I think this is a great, just foundational, show for what we got in store. So we can kind of close it up right there. You got any announcements or anything that you want to let the people know?
Oh, yes, definitely. What I really want people to do is tune in to Kalapurusha Astrology, because more of these topics will be discussed there in depth, as far as the precession of the equinoxes, the difference between tropical and sidereal. We're going to talk about different things on that channel. So definitely, subscribe, link in. When the videos start coming, they will come. They're lined up to drop. So I definitely want people to be able to get that information and take it and go study it and learn for yourself. That's the major one I really want to focus on, is because it's going to be a phenomenal channel. Excuse me.
Indeed. And where can they get tuned in with Kalapurusha? Yep, and they can also find you on Instagram as well, right? Dig that. And for myself, you can find, all the content that we produce, including this podcast, at pushitforward.com. That's PUSHITFWD.com. And we're on Instagram at pushitforward, spelled just like pushitforward.com. And I want you all to go check out the latest project that we've put together. It's a concept, for a vegan food travel show called Veg Kingdom. And you can follow that Instagram for everything related to that project at Veg Kingdom TV on Instagram, and Veg Kingdom not Veg Kingdom TV, just vegkingdom.com. We're also going to have some, short films and, other, content and interviews, different things coming up pretty soon. And we'll be tying in some of the stuff we talk about here in this podcast, leveraging astrology and, coming up with some pretty, innovative stories and things like that as well. And you can, stay tuned with this podcast in particular on Instagram at Cosmic Convo. That's COSMICCONVO. And that's the Instagram for the page. And, just stay in tune with us. Brother Ra, he's going to be, doing some lives and different things on his Instagram. And, we're going to, be putting out, different little astrological, occurrences that's coming up. And, we just got a lot in store. So definitely stay tuned in. All right. You got any closing words?
No, my brother, just keep looking up. Just keep looking up and take advantage of the night sky and see for yourself the beauty of astrology.
Indeed. So thank you for tuning in. We'll be back here same time, same place next week with some more, innovative, astrological talk for you. So on that note, peace and blessings. And until next time, stay great. And like Brother Ross said, keep looking up. All right.
Peace.